Today we start a new series gearing up for Easter, and I guess this is my 18th or 19th year to get ready for Easter. And it really, sometimes it gets challenging for the preacher to say, what did I preach at Easter that I didn't preach last year at Easter, or the year before at Easter, or the year before that? Same thing for Christmas. Same thing for Mother's Day. All these holidays, we just preach the same thing. And then it occurred to me as I was thinking about the next series that the biggest event for us as Christians is the resurrection. That is the biggest event. And we talk about that one day out of the year. So this year, we're going to take 4 days and talk about it. So we're going to quadruple the amount of sermons that you hear specifically dealing with the resurrection. And so what I want us to do is we're going to take 4 Sundays leading up to Easter, and we're going to talk about the resurrection and how the resurrection was viewed through different people's eyes and what we can glean from that. All right? So today we're going to talk about the guys on the road to Emmaus. Next week we're going to talk about Thomas. Then we're going to talk about Peter. And then on Easter, we're going to close things up with what the resurrection means for me and you today. All right, so we're going to wrap all this stuff up. And so I'm pretty excited. So this is Through My Eyes, and today we're talking about fulfillment. And as we get started, I want to think about probably Ellie's favorite thing to do in the whole wide world, and that's to play with Play-Doh. I mean, she just loves Play-Doh. Anybody else have kids or grandkids love Play-Doh? And you fight it off, right? No. It's like, I don't know how Play-Doh is still in business. Apparently it is the bane of the existence of most parents, and yet we continue to buy it. So we've got Play-Doh. That's our favorite thing to do. And for us as grown-ups, most of the time I think we view God as being a big chunk of Play-Doh. And you say, well, what in the world does that mean? You and I want to shape God into the image that we expect Him to fit. So, and I'm not going to do it because it's an exercise in futility. But I could go around the room and say, describe God. And every one of us would have a different description. Listen, and it's not that we would have a different description. It's that we would have a description. And the moment you open your mouth to answer the question, you have put God in a box and you have fallen miserably short of describing God. In philosophy, there is a term that we use in dealing with Christ. And it's called holy other. Not H-O-L-Y, but W-A. Holy other. Another way to describe that, He is a non-comparable particular. There is nothing else like Him. And so the moment you try to say He is like, no, He's not. He's not like your grandpa. He's not like your dad. He's not like a ray of sunshine. He's not like... Now we use those terms, and I'm not saying don't, because we use those things to describe this God that we love and we worship and we adore and we follow. Just recognize that you're miserably short in describing who God is. We cannot comprehend. The problem we run into when we start trying to make God into who we want Him to be is that we put certain expectations on Him then. For instance, last night, I've got this guy on Facebook, friends with, former professor of mine. He has got to be the most miserable human being alive. And I don't mean like I can't stand him. If you just read his post, you would see that this guy is as depressed as you... I don't know if they make enough Xanax for this guy. You can put him on Xanax, Prozac, anything. I don't even know what all they make for that kind of stuff. You put him on everything, and he's still going to be depressed. And his posts, they all describe that. And I think part of his problem is that he has come up with an image of God and he can't figure out why God doesn't meet it. For instance, his biggest thing right now that he's so depressed about is he sees people who are mistreating other folks. And he can't understand why God isn't judging those people who are mean. And he says if God is who he says he is, then there must be some sort of justice. Some sort of, now you're getting yours and I'm going to judge you. Well, this guy, like I said, he's a professor. He's smart, got a PhD. He ought to be able to read the book of Ecclesiastes and realize that judgment may not come until the very end. That this justice you're searching for may not come until the last hurrah, final day of judgment. What he also has to realize is that some of the things that he's expecting God to judge folks for may not be offenses. Because he's got some other ideas that I think don't gee-haw with Scripture. And so you've got all of these issues of us expecting certain things out of God, and then we get sideways when God doesn't meet our expectations. And that is exactly what we're going to talk about today in the resurrection. In the resurrection, we find fulfillment. Not fulfillment of what you expect God to be. We find fulfillment of who God is. And so it matters none what we expect God to be. God's never said, Tommy, what do you want me to be today? God's never said, how do you want me to act today? You want me to do this or you want me to do that? He doesn't do that. God says, this is who I am. If one of us are going to adapt, it's not God adapting, is it? Now, in practice, we really want a God that adapts to us. In practice. Because we know better, right? Just go ahead. I'm not dogging you. It is what it is. So we're just going to be honest today. You know, if you can be honest one day a week, let's pick Sunday while we're all together. The issue is that in practice, we want God to adapt to us. Because it's me that's in the moment, right? I'm the one that sees right now. I know what I'm facing. I know what I'm going through. I know what I need. I know what I want. I know what will make the situation better. I know all of these things. So in practice, we really want a God that adapts to us. Because I know how miserable it is to lose someone you love. And God, you should have just healed them. I know how miserable it is to lose the job. God, you should have let me keep it. I know how miserable it is to, God, you should have just done this, or you should have done that, or you should have done something else. We want a God that adapts to us in practice. In theory, if you stop and think about it, remove yourself from the situation, a God that adapts to us would be horrible. Do you want a God that does what you want? How many of you have ever changed your mind about anything? You can raise your hand. We need to see this. We need a visible sign. How many of you have said, I will never, and emphatically, I will never do, and you did? And how many of you had a wife said, I thought you were never going to do that. I'm just saying. One of those two. How many of you wish you could have said that to your wife, but you were smarter? So so in theory, when you start thinking about what life would be like if you had a God that adapted to us, he wouldn't be God at all. He'd be a genie. Waiting to find out, well, what do you want me to do today? And we change so much. You know, how many of you, people that we used to not like, now we do like? That's the situation I'm thinking about right now. Because I've heard this story 100 times from two people in our church that at one point did not like each other, and now they do. You know, if you're a genie, if God's a genie, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, however, not 30 years ago, they wouldn't have been born. You like that? That's good, isn't it? I'm talking about Mandy and Amy. 20 years ago, one of them might have, I think, I don't know, from the story I get, Mandy was the sweet, nice one. Isn't that right, Mandy? Yes. So see, 20 years ago, Amy would have said, God, get her. And now she would be so heartbroken had God gotten her 20 years ago. So we changed so much. We don't need a God that adapts to us. We need to adapt to Him. Well, today you're going to look at this story in Luke chapter 24, and you're going to see two guys who are completely down in the mouth because God has failed them. God has absolutely failed them. So let's look at it. Luke chapter 24, beginning verse 13. And behold, two of them were going that very day to a village named Emmaus. Now, it's important, Luke likes timelines. Remember, Luke is probably the most scholarly, maybe with the exception of Paul, the most scholarly writer of the New Testament. And so Luke is very important when it comes to time. And so he says that very day. So he's tying all of these events together. We go all the way back to the Passover, to the garden, to the arrest, to the trial, to the crucifixion, to the burial, to the resurrection, all of these things, boom, 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 timeline. And so on the very day that Jesus is raised from the dead, he says, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus. And we don't know where that is. Luke tells us, though, that it was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all of these things which had taken place. And you would expect that, wouldn't you? They've been to Jerusalem for the weekend, for Passover. They had all of these great expectations, and nothing turned out like they wanted it to. Nothing turned out like they thought it was going to. And so they're discussing this amongst themselves. And while they were talking with each other about all these things which had taken place, and while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself approached and began traveling with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. So the resurrected Lord is now in their presence. He just joins them. And they're talking. Verse 17, and he said to them, what are these words that you are exchanging with one another as you're walking? And they stood still, looking sad. That was a nice way of saying this. They stopped and they looked at Jesus and said, are you an idiot? Are you blind? Where have you been? The biggest thing that has happened in years happened this weekend and you don't even know about it? Are you living under a rock, man? Are you a hermit? Are you an ostrich and you had your head in the sand? What's going on? They stood still looking sad. And sad is they were distraught. They were depressed. They were down in the mouth. You pick a word and you can put it in there, and it probably is not strong enough to cover it. And one of them named Cleopas. And we're not sure who Cleopas was. Apparently he was known by the readers. That's why Luke thought it was important to put his name in there. Tradition tells us that Cleopas was the uncle of Jesus. And he was Joseph's brother. And we don't know that for sure, but makes the story good, I guess. He answered and said to him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of these things which have happened here in these days? And he said to them, what things? And they said to him, the things about Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word in sight of God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be sentenced to death and crucified him. And so let's talk about how they describe him. Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word in the sight of God and all the people. They described him as prophet. Now, was he? Yes. Is this a complete picture of Jesus? No. In theological terms, we would talk about Jesus being prophet, priest, and king. And they leave out priest, and they leave out king. And they just talk about him being the prophet. Verse 21, but we were hoping, here it is. Here's the box that they have created for Jesus. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, it is the third day since these things happened. But also some women among us amazed when they went to the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. They came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just exactly as the women had said, but him they did not see. So they said, we've created this box for Jesus. We were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. And he failed. It wasn't him. We put all our hopes and all of our faith and all of our trust in this one that we were hoping was going to be the one to redeem Israel. And besides all that, now we don't even know where his body's at. We can't even set up a shrine. We can't even go to the tomb, in hopes of having a martyr that we can rally around. Remember when the U.S. chose to bury Osama bin Laden at sea because they didn't want a physical grave where followers could come and rally around and have a martyr to rally around. I said, we don't even have his body to rally around now. We've got nothing. I've dedicated the last 3 years of my life, and for what? For nothing. That's all over with. Going back home. Guys, we do that all the time. All the time we get distraught with God because he failed us. Because he let us down. Right? Because he didn't meet our expectations. He didn't fit into our nice, neat package of what God looks like. How many of you have ever had plans that just fell apart? It didn't make any sense. I don't know why this happened. And it's easy to look at God in those times and say, seriously? I mean, that's what those guys looked at Jesus and said, right? We're talking about figuratively looking at God and say, seriously? They literally looked at him and said, seriously? Seriously. Now we don't even know where he is. Verse 25. O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe in all. It's an important word. O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. The people that should have believed in Jesus the most easily would have been the Pharisees. They should have believed without any question. These were the religious leaders. These were the scholars. These were the people who knew the Old Testament frontwards and backwards and forwards and sideways. And why didn't they? Because they picked and chose what they wanted. The image of God they were hoping to see. The box they wanted him to fit in. And Jesus showed up and he didn't look like that. Guys, had Jesus shown up in armor, the Pharisees would have followed him. Had Jesus shown up with a sword and said, let's kill the Romans, Pharisees would have looked at the Jews and said, let's rally around this man. This is our Messiah. But Jesus showed up and he healed people. Jesus showed up and he said, I offer forgiveness of sins. Jesus showed up and he said, it's not about sacrifices. It's about a sacrifice. Pharisees said, this doesn't fit our model. Nobody wants a weak leader, right? Right? We've been dealing with all this stuff in Ukraine right now, in America. And how many conservative pundits have looked and said, well, our president's being really weak right now, and America doesn't need a weak president, we need a strong president. We're not the first people to say we need a strong leader. It goes all the way back to ancient Israel. Remember when they didn't have a king at all? And they told Samuel, we want a king. Everybody else got a king that leads them out into battle. It's the time of war. It's the spring of the year, and this is when the kings lead out their people, and we don't have one. All we got's you. Old man who's a prophet. Good are you. We all want the strong leader. And he says, O foolish men, slow of heart to believe in all the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ? Remember, Christ is not Jesus' last name. Christ is a title. The Messiah. The anointed one. The chosen one. Was it not necessary for the anointed one to suffer these things and to enter into his glory. Now, it may blow your mind for just a second, because we think about, for God to love the world that he gave his only begotten Son, right? And for most of us, we think of that phrase, Son, or the phrase Son of God, like we do in human relations, right? How many of you have a son? You got a son, we throw in a daughter. You have a daughter. So we think of that's a daughter of Tommy, or that's the son of Jack. So we think of these human relations. And so when we use that word, it's talking about a relationship. It's not used as a title. Well, the Son of God is not talking about a relationship. The Son of God is talking about a title. And so the writer of Hebrews tells us that the title, Son of God, was bestowed on Jesus because he fulfilled what the Father said do. He was obedient, and he went and he died on a cross. And then the Father raised him from the dead and bestowed on him the title, Son of God, because he had completed what he was supposed to do. He did what he was supposed to do. So it's not a father-son relationship. That's why it's so hard for some people to understand the Trinity. How can you have a father and a son? Father is part of the birthing of the Son. Well, that's not, we're talking titles, not relationships. And so he says, was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory? The power, the glory, all of those things, the Great Commission, where Jesus tells his disciples that all power and authority has been given unto me. Why was all power and authority given unto him? Because he was obedient to death on the cross. And the Father said, here, it's yours. Jesus lived 33 years on planet Earth, and he never used his power for his own benefit. Never used his authority for his own benefit. After the resurrection, the Father bestows on him this title, Son of God. You've completed, you've done everything that I wanted you to do. And then Jesus says, all power and authority has been given unto me. I'm in charge. I'm the boss. That's what a media case says. I'm the boss. He said, for all these things to happen, he said, you've got this idea of what you think the Messiah is going to do. And I want to tell you, before any of those things could happen, the Messiah first had to die on the cross. He had to be dead. He had to be crucified for all of these other things to happen. But look at what he says, verse 27. Then beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself in all the Scriptures. Imagine how cool that would have been. I mean, it's one thing, we've probably all been in a church service where the preacher was talking and you're just like, wow, I get that. Never really saw that before. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Could you imagine if it was Jesus doing the actual teaching? I had a professor in college that was at one of these big society meetings, whatever. And so this guy's up there and he's giving this paper on another person. It'd be like if I were to say, David Cowling says this, and this is his viewpoint on this particular topic, and here's how he would handle that. And then at the end of it, he opened up for questions, and this guy stood up and he said, are you sure that David Cowling would agree with that? And the guy's like, oh, definitely. I've studied him, and I've read all of his works, and I know all of these things about him. And the guy says, I'm David Cowling, and I don't think that way. And so that's what happened to this guy. He's up there giving this scholarly lecture about this other person, and at the end of it, that person stands up and says, you don't know what you're talking about. Here's what I think about it. So now these guys are walking, and Jesus starts with Moses, and he goes through all the prophets explaining himself. They have gotten it straight from the horse's mouth. And as they approached the village where they were going, he acted as though he were going further. It's a good thing this was not America, because we'd have just said, see you later. This was the Middle East, and they are much more hospitable than we are. And they urged him, and urged is almost they made him stop. They said, stay with us, for it is getting toward evening, and day is now nearly over. And so he went in to stay with them. And when he had reclined at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed it, and breaking it, he began giving it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, were not our hearts burning within us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining the Scriptures to us? You can imagine. They said, wasn't there just something different about that guy? The way he talked, what he knew, how he said it. Were not our hearts burning within us? And they got up that very hour. Now it is nighttime. And they do not have a flashlight. They don't have their Coleman headlight. They don't have anything. It is nighttime. And they got up that very hour and returned to Jerusalem. I bet you that the 7 miles going back to Jerusalem went much faster than the 7 miles coming from Jerusalem. And they found gathered together the 11 and those who were with them, saying, the Lord has really risen and has appeared to Simon. And they began to relate their experience on the road and how he recognized them in the breaking of the bread. Fulfillment. In the resurrection, we find Jesus fulfilling who Jesus is. We don't find Jesus fulfilling who we think he is. We don't find Jesus fulfilling who we hope he is. We find Jesus fulfilling who he is. And who is he? In the resurrection, we find that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. That he is the anointed one, chosen one of God. And that it's through him that we find forgiveness of our sins and true change and true faith. Guys, I want to tell you that Christ has the ability to make us different. Not the Christ you hope he is, not the Christ you want him to be, but the Christ he actually is. My challenge for myself and my challenge for you, and it's the challenge that God gives us, is not to believe in a God that we want, but believe in the God who is. Not to believe in a God who changes to us, but to believe in a God so much that we're willing to change to him. That's the resurrection. The resurrection is he's real. And they were just so blind that they couldn't see it. Guys, I want to tell you that had Christ not died on the cross, had he not been buried, had he not been raised from the dead, you and I could all be fishing today, and it would matter nothing. It all just matters because he died and came back to life. That's it. That's the culmination. That's everything from the very beginning is leading us to that climax, that moment in time when God the Creator breathed his last breath saying, it is finished. What's finished? I'm sick and tired of these folks? No. What's finished? Oh, I'm tired of being manipulated? No. His plan, his purpose, he had accomplished it. It was over with. He didn't stop and say, hey, John, before I go, is there anything else you want me to do? All right? It's like talking to my mom on the telephone. Tomorrow morning I'll call her. And I promise you, I'll say, Mom, I got to go. And she'll say, hey, before you go, let me tell you this. We didn't get any of that. Jesus didn't say, hey, Mary, is there anything else you need me to do? His plan had been accomplished. And he said, it is finished. And with that, he breathed his last. And the entire world fell apart. Literally. I mean, there was an earthquake and people were raised from the dead that day. So literally the world fell apart at his death. The veil of the temple was torn in two. This was a major event. But it wasn't the end of that event, was it? He came back to life. So guys, in the resurrection we find fulfillment. Again, not of who we hope he is, but who he actually is. And of not what we want him to be, but who he is. And so, as we look toward Easter, I want us to be more and more committed every day to search Scripture to find out who he actually is. Not who your mom said he was, or or not who you hope he was, or not who Hollywood says he was. You know, Christian movies are now big business. And it is amazing the number of non-believers who are lining up to make Christian movies. And we go to the movie theater and we can't figure out why lost people can't get it right. Well, the reason why lost people can't get it right is because the church can't even get it right. If we took a poll in Malvern just today, who do you think God is? How many of us would be wrong? Every one of us. Every one of us. We'd all be short. So you take a little here and a little there and a little somewhere else, and then parts of us would be completely wrong, where that's not him at all. So my challenge, guys, is for us to spend time in Scripture to find out who he actually is. Because this is where you have to go to find that. Notice, Jesus did not talk about tradition. He didn't talk about what the latest priest said, or what the Pharisees said, or what this high priest or that chief priest, or what this guy said or that guy said. Starting with Moses and through all the prophets, he explained who he was. You want to know who God is? He's right here. Right here. Guys, that's our challenge. Resurrection's a mighty big thing. And in it, we find out that Jesus is who he says he was. We just have to know who that is. Let me pray for us.